So many Fortnite players are complaining that the prizing from tournaments sucks, which is interesting given this is the prize pool for the FNCS Global Championships happening this week. In fact, Dota 2 is the only esport that's ever given away more total prize money than Fortnite. So why are players complaining, and why are some of their complaints actually valid? Well, I made a tweet asking the Fortnite competitive community's honest thoughts on the current Fortnite prize pools, and I've broken down all of the responses into 4 main talking points. Let's start with the most basic. It's not enough money. Trash. You can be a tier 1 and be poor. Now, if you know Fortnite, you'll know this is just already not the case. Since the game's first tournaments in 2018, there's been around $169 million in prizing distributed from Fortnite events. When splitting that up per year, almost 50% of that came in 2019. At a glance, it may seem like the 2023 earnings look poor. However, you can immediately add $4 million for the FNCS Global Championships, and there's another 3 months events that are not accounted for yet. So it's safe to say there's been a pretty consistent high amount of money up for grabs for the last 4 years, even if it has varied a bit. Since 2018, 16 players have racked up over $1 million in earnings. 41 players have earned more than $500,000, and 94 players have earned more than $250,000. So yeah, Fortnite gives away enough money. You may disagree with me, but I mean they do, so you're wrong. But this isn't really the main point that a lot of the players are upset about. The main issue is around how the money is split out and distributed. Fortnite prize pools are split into 3 different types of events. There's FNCS and Cash Cups, which are hosted by Epic Games, and then there's third-party events which are hosted by other companies. Looking first at the third-party events, this year we've seen bigger prize pools than ever. There was an entire zero-build LAN circuit with around $3 million earnings, Women of the Arena, Red Pool Contested, Samsung Odyssey, Invitational 2023, and tons more third-party events for players to earn from. Hell, I even earned over 1k from the Piz Cup this season. This is something that a lot of other esports do not have. Either they are run by the game developer exclusively, or one main third party controls the entire scene. The main way players earn is through FNCS, the real yearly circuit. This year, there's been 3 $2 million online FNCS majors that led to the $4 million FNCS Global Championship this week. Winning one of these 3 online FNCS majors in Europe will net your duo $200,000 to split, and winning the FNCS Global Championships at the end of the year will net your duo $1 million to split. On the flip side, placing poorly in these events will still net you a nice reward, since only the best players each season actually qualify. I don't see many players complaining about this, and they shouldn't. The Cash Cups is where things get controversial. Now, if you've seen my last video, I did an entire 28-minute breakdown on the progression of these prize pools since 2019. To sum it up, shit's changed. In 2019, winning a solo Cash Cup in Europe was $7,000. Now it's $100 per game win, and you can only win 2 games maximum, so $200 a week. However, it's important to note that that money hasn't vanished from the pot. Roughly the same amount of money is being distributed weekly, it's just been more evenly distributed to more players. The top players make less money, but the average and intermediate players make the odd $100 here and there. This is great for getting new players into competitive, because it's a $100 carrot at the end of a stick for intermediate level players. However, the already established competitive community are making less money than ever from these events, and this is where most people's frustrations lie. For the next 2 months, you can literally win every event, and you just have earned $7,200. And back in the day, you could have 2 top 5 placements in just solo Cash Cups over the course of 2 months, and you would have the same amount earned. But this line here is what interests me. It's just bad and inconsistent money if you're not placing in FNCS. The obvious reply to this is, if players want to earn good income, they have to be placing in the main competitive events of the year, which is of course FNCS. So how many players are making a living off of their earnings alone? Fortnite players are from different countries around the world, so to compare this to an average annual income is quite difficult to do. A country like Freedomland has a much higher yearly income than, say, Poland, so the nearly $1.8 million that Epic Whale has earned is worth less, respectively, than the $1.1 million that Cammy has earned. When looking at the top 20 EU players by power ranking, some interesting stats pop out. This year, the average earned from Duo Cash Cups is $11,530, with the highest being Malabuka, who's earned an impressive $30,350. This actually sounds pretty good until you split this number into each season, where the players' complaints seem to make a little bit more sense. This large number in the first season is mainly due to the Elite Cups that had a significantly larger prize pool than the current Duo Cash Cups. The Solo Victory Cup also had a maximum of 7 games rather than 3, and the Zero Build Squad Cup also had a larger prize pool. This means that with the current prizing distribution, the number 1 ranked player this year is making $2,000 every season from Cash Cups, which is around $666 a month. I don't know about you, but I think the top 200 to 300 players should have better incentives than this. I don't think giving away massive prizing is really the answer. It's really not sustainable, and that's what FNCS is for, but there's absolutely no way any player will be able to make a sustainable income from this. This prize pool is only designed to attract new players into competitive and in no way really rewards the top placing players who are already in the competitive scene. I feel like there can definitely be a better balance between the two without changing the total amount of money given away. Over the 3 cash cup types, currently both the solo build and the duo zero build victory cups act as a great entry point for new players. If the zero build cup stayed exactly the same way as it is now, this can act as the main gateway for players who have never played a tournament before. Plus, if the top prizing was increased, hackers would just win more money anyway. The zero build cups historically were a great place for newer players to prove themselves, in particular ones who didn't have teammates. In terms of difficulty, I believe this should be one step up from the duo zero build mode and should be a little bit more restrictive on how the money is distributed. Personally, I would change the prize from winning from $100 to $500 and the amount of players that qualified from 7,500 down to top 2,500, with players only being able to play 2 games rather than 3. These changes mean that for Epic Games, they're actually still giving away the same amount of money per week. However, the players who are actually earning have a better chance to win more. The top 2,500 threshold is also still generous enough to entice new and mid-level players to compete, especially when each win is now $500 rather than $100. I kind of also know which games I'd rather watch as a viewer as well. The Duo Cash Cup is also pretty strange. Historically, players can make pretty good money each week here. However, the prizing has been distributed much more evenly across the 6 regions. If you place 11th in EU, the hardest and most competitive region, you earn the same as 40th in Middle East or OCE. These two aren't even nearly comparable in terms of difficulty. The first thing I do is cut out a bunch of these bottom placements and add money into the 11th to 20th to reward players getting out of that bottom half of the lobby. I'd also bump up the prizing for the top 10 to make winning the Cash Cup alone worth a bit more. I do the same thing in the smaller regions, taking a small amount of money from each and redistributing it to EU and NA Central to balance the skill levels of each. These prize pools are almost exactly the same amount of money given away per week. However, the top performers are rewarded more for winning, and the lower level players can still get some money if they just do okay. Combine this with the changes to the Solo Victory Cash Cup, and now players have a chance to make good money while still enticing new players into competitive Fortnite and giving a wide variety of players access to make their first earnings. So how many players are currently making a full-time living off of playing Fortnite competitively? Well, for that, we need to take a look at our third point: orgs in Fortnite. In most esports, the way players make their money is vastly different from Fortnite. Most esports have franchise leagues with specific teams and orgs that only get access to compete at the higher level. All of the other non-tier 1 teams have to fight for the spots in the big events, whilst often having minimal potential to earn. The tier 1 players make their money from salaries, revenue splits from their team's in-game cosmetics, and from prize pools. Often the salary is the largest percentage of this income, which is completely different from Fortnite, where tournament prizing is nearly always their main income. Since Fortnite is an open system that any player can compete in, this comes with positives and negatives. The downsides are that since tier 1 players don't have big orgs supporting their salaries, their main income comes from tournament prize pools, and if they don't place extremely well in FNCS, they are not making good money. Whereas in other esports, if you still place reasonably well, you still have that guaranteed consistent salary. Of course, the positives on the other side is that you don't have to be in an org or in a team to compete. If you're watching this video and you are good enough, you can win cash cups and you can win FNCS and you can make good money. There's no gatekeeping, there's no team politics, you just find a duo and you play. For the sake of comparison, let's say that a good yearly salary to earn from gaming alone is $50,000. I basically just tried to get roughly the average salary across the world and basically just round it to 50k. From what we know earlier, at least 94 people in the world have averaged an earnings of 50k a year across the last 4 years. So far in 2023, there have been exactly 50 players who have earned over 50k. Again, still with the biggest tournament of the year to go and a couple months of tournaments left. So let's say roughly by the end of the year, there'll be 70 players who will have made at least $50,000. Organizations do of course exist in Fortnite too, but their salaries are nothing in comparison to other titles. There's probably 5 to 10 players on yearly salaries over $50,000, and those are players who are already earning over that in tournament prizing anyway. So let's just make a round assumption that there's roughly 100 players each year making over $50,000 just from playing professionally. So how does this compare to other esports? Well, in Valorant, a game which I know absolutely nothing about, so apologies if any of this is incorrect, their franchising league has 30 teams. My man Bola said 33 is the team's minimum, and then 44 because of like China or something, I don't know. So let's just go with 44 teams. He told me that the salaries in the Americas range between 120k to 360k, then the EMEA and Pacific are between 80 to 120. However, there are rumors of a few Pacific contract salaries being close to $1 million a year. By the way, this is per player, not per team. Now, these salaries aren't sustainable by any means, and they're starting to decrease already, but Valorant is a relatively new game, and teams have overinvested in it early as they didn't really understand their reinvestment yet. Regardless, with 44 teams and 5 players at a minimum, you already have 176 players making a full-time income just from playing professionally. But Valorant also has a Tier 2 Ascension system, where lower-ranked teams can fight their way into the Tier 1 league. From what I hear, this is a bit like the Wild Wild West, where some orgs are paying massive salaries for a little return on their investment, just kind of hoping their team will place first and qualify up into the Tier 1 franchising system, and other teams are pretty much just paying nothing and scamming their players. So lowballing, let's say there's 200 players making a full-time living playing Valorant, and that's already double Fortnite's. The flip side is that the players who aren't able to compete as part of these teams make close to nothing, unlike Fortnite, where tournaments are still open to everyone and you can at least earn something. However, the irony here is that Fortnite's system can almost actually make it more unfair to an extent. Top players are able to sustain themselves financially so they can play full time. Most of the top players in North America moved to Texas when the servers combined from NA East and NA West to NA Central, something you can only sustain if you have the income for it. Bottom ranked players in FNCS Grand Finals don't have the same time to play and practice as the top players. They have school, work, and other responsibilities taking up their time. When it comes to an FNCS Grand Finals, they're never going to be as prepared as a full-time player because they can't VOD review, they don't have as much time to practice, they can't scrim as much, and thus the best players stay the best. Each lobby will have 20 to 30 full-timers, and the rest will be part-time players. And this is why I think it's important to bridge the gap and have better distribution for cash cup prizing, as I mentioned earlier in the video. Now those players have more of a stepping stone to make playing full-time an actual reality. Of course, a narrative that's often brought up is content. If players want to make a sustainable living, they should be making content to supplement their income. Now, I do agree, players should make content. They have massive platforms and viewers want to watch them play. However, where I disagree is that players have to make content in order to make a living. Being a professional player is time consuming, maybe not for some gifted players who can just play only a few hours a day and stay at their peak, but for the most part, players are playing 5+ hours every single day. Making content takes a lot of time, which otherwise could be put into practicing. And as I mentioned, these players are already most likely not full-time already and don't have the time to make content because they already don't have enough time to play on top of that. So no, prize pools in Fortnite do not suck. The amount of prize money given away is actually insane, but with just a few changes to the ways that the cash is distributed, we could see a competitive scene that both entices players to play tournaments as it currently does, but also keeps them interested in playing at a high level.